So, the Mario 3D All-Stars collection recently released, bringing 3 absolute classic Mario games over to the Nintendo Switch, and I'd like to discuss each of these games on their own in separate videos. I was debating how I wanted to talk about this collection, and just decided I wanted to give each game its time in the spotlight. They each deserve it, in my opinion. And then I think I'm going to wrap it up with a discussion of the collection in general, and perhaps whether or not we're getting enough value out of it. So first up is, of course, Super Mario 64. Now, I gotta admit right off the bat, it's hard for me to be unbiased about this game. Super Mario World is probably my favorite Mario game of all time, but there's no Mario game, perhaps no game period, that I have as much nostalgia for as Mario 64. I still remember getting this game along with Pilot Wings 64, along with my actual Nintendo 64 system on launch day, and just being blown away by this game. That's something you younger people kind of have to remember about the time period when this game originally released. At that time, many people had never really seen anything like this before. This was really the dawn of the 3D gaming era. There had been attempts at 3D games before it, a lot of games on PC. We actually had this shooter in my house called The Hive that I used to play a ton of. But this was the mainstream introduction to playing video games set in a 3-dimensional space. Everyone absolutely loved this game when it came out, but that was also many years ago. Gaming has come a long way since then, and it's a common belief that these early 3D games haven't aged well, much worse actually than many of their 2D predecessors. So I want to discuss specifically how this relic holds up today, and if it's worth playing for people who don't have the nostalgia for it. Having said that, let's start by talking about the visuals. Again, for its time, this game was cutting edge, but as with most of these N64 and original PlayStation era games, the graphics of this game haven't aged that well. It's aged much better than most games for that era, I'd argue, which again is quite a feat considering it was a launch game for the N64. But yeah, visually it leaves a lot to be desired in 2020. Extremely simplistic character models and environments, a lot of sharp edges in the games from this time. Definitely leaves a lot to be desired. In fact, when we first heard rumblings about this collection and the potential for these games being remastered, this was the one I was hoping would get like a full-on remake, being done up to look as good as, say, Mario Odyssey. I think that would have been awesome. I actually would love to see some games from this era get like the Halo Anniversary treatment, where you get like a remake or a remaster and can actually switch between the original and new graphics on the fly. I think that's something devs Nintendo should really be considering. Ocarina of Time, I think, would be a great candidate for something like that as well. But yeah, this is what we were actually given. No real touch-ups at all to the game visually. And in fact, there are some new issues that are either new to this version of the game or just amplified by it. Like, I know a lot of people have pointed out the low-res Mario that pops in and out, which was necessary on the old hardware and wasn't really noticeable on CRTs, but now, playing the game in HD, it's definitely noticeable. Stuff like the signs being practically unreadable as well, it's like, stuff like that could have been fixed. But yeah, for the most part, for better or worse, the game mostly looks the same, besides it obviously running in HD. Still though, I think it holds up surprisingly well in the graphics department. A lot of these OG 3D games can be straight up painful to look at, but I don't think Mario 64 looks half bad, all things considered. And there's a certain charm, I think, with the limited nature of what could actually be achieved during this time. Stuff like the terrifying swamp JPEG faces, for instance. The devs had to try to be extremely creative again while working in a new space in terms of level design to make sure things not only worked but were fun to play, and that these levels were fun to play multiple times as you're going through them over and over, doing different little quests to get stars in that. And yeah, this has a lot to do with nostalgia, but stuff like seeing the scale between Mario and Bowser in the boss fights, again, there was just nothing like this during that time. Still impresses me to this day. In terms of the gameplay, again, you've got some of the issues with it being an early 3D game. Platforming games in nature require a fair amount of precision, and it can be quite difficult to judge your spacing and distances in this game. The actual controls, I think, are fine, a bit stiff. There are issues definitely with like interacting with characters. I don't remember it being this hard. It's like when you want to walk up to talk to an NPC, you have to be like perfectly lined up in front of them, or Mario's just going to keep flailing around. Nintendo is using a later released version of this game that patched out some of the issues the game had, but as well as some things people had a lot of fun with, like the backwards long jump exploits, as well as by far my biggest issue with the game, the removal of one of gaming's most classic phrases. Yeah, replacing it with the lame bye-bye just doesn't have the same impact. Basically ruins the experience for me, not gonna lie. But in seriousness, the biggest problem with this title in terms of gameplay, I'm sure we can pretty much unanimously agree, is the camera. The camera really is the toughest enemy in this game. It's super wonky the way you have to like jerk it into position. It always seems to get positioned in the worst possible location, and with this again being a platformer, a 3D platformer in specific, it can make it really hard to judge your jumps. Like, it may seem like you're in position, but because of the wonky camera angle, you're actually not. This has always been the biggest complaint, I think, with this game, that camera is just evil. Another big issue that's the result of this being an early 3D era game, but it's also perpetuated by Nintendo choosing to pretty much do no improvements with the game. Like I said though, I do think you can get used to it, and I think platforming overall feels good enough. It's still satisfying and, most importantly, enjoyable to do all these years later. Elements like the flying once more rough by today's standards, but I still don't get sick of just flying around these levels and taking in all that basic-ass scenery. So how does this game actually hold up? It definitely shows its age in pretty much every aspect, I'm not gonna lie. But trying my best to keep my nostalgia out of the way, I still think it's very playable. It takes some getting used to the stiffer controls as well as that awful camera, but I think if people stick with it, you can very much still enjoy yourself, even if you didn't grow up with the game like me. And like I said, there's a certain charm to it all. Once more, it's kind of crazy in my opinion how this N64 launch title actually holds up so much better than other games from that era. I think the level of quality here is amplified greatly when you really compare it to other games from that time. Sure, this looks very crude compared to, modern games like Odyssey, definitely even Galaxy, which is in this same collection, but when you stack it up against the other games from that time period, it's definitely the cream of the crop. And yes, I think it's still plenty of fun to play today. And I do think it's obviously a very important release in terms of the history of gaming for the reasons I've mentioned, and this is something I often say for people who are big into the hobby, that I think it's good to go back and play these games just to have a better understanding of the past, as well as put into perspective how far we've actually come since then. Of course, allowing my nostalgia to kick in, there's no way I'll ever not love this game to pieces. That 64 era in general, just so many good memories for me, and every time I pick up a controller and play one of these games, they all come rushing back, and it all started with Super Mario 64. Anyway, with that, this video's a wrap. Let me know your thoughts on Super Mario 64 as part of this 3D All-Stars collection in the comments. Did you grow up with this game like me? How do you feel it holds up today? And do you think Nintendo should have polished this one up more for this release? Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed this discussion of Super Mario 64 as part of the Mario 3D All-Stars collection. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. And if you want to keep the conversation going, hit me up on Twitter at Johnny Zakari and join my Discord, ChiGuy and Friends. Link to both in the description below. And as always, thanks for watching.